If I had a dollar for every time somebody said that Ethereum was dead, I'd be super rich by now. I mean, it's every cycle. People are fading Ethereum and saying that it won't come back. It's done. It's a bleeder. So I want to take a look today at Ethereum in this video and look at it from a few different perspectives to see if the people are right this time and Ethereum really is dead. It's important to understand that I look at Ethereum from the perspective of, is it outperforming Bitcoin? Um, I don't really care about what its valuation is against the US dollar unless it's outperforming Bitcoin. So understand that first. I'm the Gaussian snake. This is crypto simulation theory, and this is not financial advice. There is no question when we look at ETH Bitcoin on the monthly time frame that things don't look great. Um, I have a Bollinger Band overlaid with a Gaussian channel, and we, for the very first time in ETH, and again, this is ETH against Bitcoin. So this is the relative valuation of Ethereum to Bitcoin, which is very important to look at. Like, people think it's not, but it is. If you look at the past history of ETH Bitcoin, it had a really impressive run up in the beginning, like a lot of altcoins do, right? And then it managed to preserve the green Gaussian channel, although it did go below the median line. That's ultimately where it bottomed. This red is just an artifact of this downtrend. It's going to happen again from this particular downtrend. Now, the angle of the downtrend we've been in this time is less steep than this one. That's also expected. Diminished volatility, a normal artifact of time in the market. I've got Heikin-Ashi candles that are on the time frame. I'm going to turn off the Gaussian channel so you can see them a little bit more clearly. So we have, a spill out of these red Heikin-Ashi candles with very large candle bodies and undershadows. This is what we saw happening a few times with ETH Bitcoin last cycle. We saw a spill out in 2018 during the bear market. Interestingly, during Bitcoin's bear market, ETH Bitcoin was holding up relatively well and going sideways. It only started to spill out during Bitcoin's transition into a bull market. So this is a little bit different than what happened last time with Ethereum against Bitcoin. But we did see the secondary leg of ETH Bitcoin's bear market happen during the Bitcoin only bull market. Okay, so this is the Bitcoin only bull market from 2019, part of it at least. And we could see that it bottomed on a pretty nasty Heikin-Ashi candle. Now, ETH Bitcoin has preserved this trend line, as these are the 2019 lows, ever since. And it actually did wick below the trend line on this last Heikin-Ashi candle. The Bollinger Band is spilling out to the downside. There's been absolutely nothing above the median line of the Bollinger Band, really since June of 2023. So almost 2 full years of being below the median line of the Bollinger Band. A little bit similar to what happened in July of 2018, or if you like, August of 2018, ETH Bitcoin stayed below the Bollinger Band median line all the way until February, actually sustainably until June of 2020. But it started to at least attempt to get above it in February of 2020. So that's an interesting observation. Again, all this is on the monthly time frame. If we switch back to regular candles and look at ETH Bitcoin with regard to 3 moving averages that exist right now for it, which is the 20-month, the 50-month, and the 100-month whole moving average, we can see that ETH Bitcoin is clearly below all 3, quite underextended from it at the moment. As you can see, all 3 are just turned right down. It's not really a good look for this metric. So the big question is, can ETH Bitcoin hold the 2019 lows? And where are those lows? So I could actually extend this a little further down, this red zone I have. I probably should just extend it to right around here if I want to be a little bit more liberal with the amount of wiggle room ETH Bitcoin has to hold the 2019 lows. There is support in this region, and let's go ahead and take a look. No, I didn't mean to do that. I'm trying to get into the settings of this one. So if we look at the coordinates, we're looking at roughly 0.01642 to 0.02 Bitcoin in terms of crucial levels that ETH Bitcoin needs to hold. If ETH Bitcoin were to go below these levels, ETH Bitcoin would become or Ethereum would effectively become a bleeder against Bitcoin. Even if it, I mean, it could fake out maybe and come back up and still be okay, but that's getting into some risky territory. If Ethereum becomes a bleeder against Bitcoin, that is not good for the crypto space in general, because Ethereum is the number 2 cryptocurrency by total market cap, and that would spell bad news for the altcoin market. So now, one thing to note about Ethereum that I want to get into next is that its behavior against Bitcoin is closely tied in to whether we're in a risk on or risk off crypto market. Okay, so I need to explain this kind of complicated looking chart to you. We have ETH Bitcoin with the red and green candles. That's the main chart I'm focusing on. The orange trend line, which is the key support levels for ETH Bitcoin to hold, although it has broken this trend line. Keep that in mind. Those were the first. I was sort of like, can we uphold this like upward sloping trend line? No, we haven't been able to do that. The white curve represents the federal funds rate, or the interest rates set by the Federal Reserve Bank. And then down below is the graph of Bitcoin on a logarithmic scale. So what I want to show you is kind of how ETH Bitcoin behaves during so-called risk-off periods in the market. And if we go to 2016, this would be sort of the first instance where the United States had a recession scare. It was a financial crisis in June of 2016. If we go out to there, the stock market had one of its absolute worst performances in history up to that point. So you can see that ETH Bitcoin as a ratio, while it did very well, initially in January, we had this big surge, right, coming out of the Bitcoin bear market. It fell quite a bit. In fact, in terms of a percentage drop during this risk-off time in the markets, ETH Bitcoin ratio fell by approximately 80%. Okay, so that's a pretty substantial drop. It fell all the way down in December of 2016. January, actually, looks like, yeah, that was, yeah, about December of 2016. It fell to around 0.007 Bitcoin. Okay, it was a macro high or low relative to the 2015 bear market drop, but still. Now, what was happening to Bitcoin during this time? Bitcoin was going, Bitcoin did also had a series of scares, right? Like it also had some drops. Like if you look at June of 2016 to August, it was not a pleasant time for Bitcoin, although Ethereum was kind of going sideways and slightly outperforming it. On the whole, we could say Ethereum underperformed Bitcoin throughout most of 2016, clearly. And it was only when we knew that a recession was averted and we weren't going to have one that Ethereum started to outperform Bitcoin again in a big way. And it went on, in terms of like a percentage gain, it printed a new all-time high. I need to take the magnet off. This is making it difficult to get the targets that I need. So take the magnet off, put the ruler back on. Went on to put in almost a 20x move against Bitcoin in 2017. At the time, interest rates were rising gradually, and Bitcoin was rising. The ETH was rising along with Bitcoin. ETH Bitcoin peaked in June of 2017, about 6 months before Bitcoin peaked, and then Ethereum, Bitcoin started to underperform in the latter half of 2017, but this had more to do with Bitcoin going into its final parabolic phase. So I just kind of want to point out, we have a period in time, a first period in time in 2016, where Ethereum was, and this was a recession scare with the federal funds rate at the time was near zero. So imagine how frightening that is, because the Fed had no tools to work with. How do you lower interest rates when they're already near zero? I think the Fed learned their lesson. Interest rates gradually were raised over the next few years. We had our Bitcoin bear market in 2018. And similar to what happened in 2022, which we're going to get to in a minute, Ethereum had a brief burst of life during the early parts of the bear market. First couple months of it, Ethereum had a nice rise to life, but then ultimately just crumbled all the way down, and down and down and down it went, as interest rates went up and as we entered into a period of quantitative tightening. Now, these interest rates pale in comparison to where we are today. Like if you look at the federal funds rate from that time in late 2018, the Fed was holding rates higher for longer at around 2.4%, which is still very low in the historical context. If you go back, in time, still generational lows here. But Ethereum, Bitcoin was not liking this, and it just kept, having these fake outs and dumping. Now, when did Ethereum, Bitcoin finally bottom? Well, it hit its first bottom, first low in August of 2019. And this is after the first rate cuts. So we had the first rate cuts happening. It looks like around July. So 1 month later, ETH Bitcoin hit a bottom. Bitcoin during this time was actually, in fact, Bitcoin went into a bull market back in January of 2019, all the way till around August, around the first cut. Bitcoin was in a bull market. Was this an impressive bull market by crypto standards? Not really. During this time, it was a Bitcoin only rally, meaning that Bitcoin dominance was elevated, right? Like a lot of altcoins were not going on to put in new highs, but Bitcoin was about 70% from its previous all-time high, a bit of an echo bubble from the 2017 rally. Okay. And then Bitcoin entered into this slow bleed. And during that time, ETH Bitcoin, bottomed, and Bitcoin's bleed was happening on rate cuts. We actually entered into a recession. It was a very brief recession, but this was a recession. Unlike 2016, which was merely a recessionary scare, a financial crisis, 2020 presented the very first actual recession that Bitcoin went through. And Ethereum, Bitcoin printed a double bottom during the rate cuts. But notice that the second bottom came in January of 2020, right as we were having the final series of rate cuts that ultimately would take us to near zero interest rates and mark the beginning of quantitative easing. You had stimulus checks going out in the United States and worldwide. Really, there were stimulus checks going out, money printing like crazy, and those were the conditions that were needed for ETH Bitcoin to really thrive. And so ETH Bitcoin printed a double bottom. And as interest rates were flattened out for a very long time, I mean, all the way from March of 2020 to around January of 2022, ETH Bitcoin enjoyed, almost a 2-year-long bull market against Bitcoin. Now, granted, it wasn't as impressive of a run as the first time around, but that's never the case, right? Look, I've never thought that Ethereum was going to flip Bitcoin. I know there were a lot of people calling for that, but I've never thought that. No, not at all. Ethereum has outperformed Bitcoin at times, but it's been an oscillator. So now we got into this rate, increase cycle because inflation was getting out of control and rates were increased at the fastest pace in a very, very long time, potentially one of the fastest paces ever. Now, during that time of the initial rate hikes, kind of similar to what was happening in early 2017, but different circumstances, so it's probably not fair to compare to this time. But during the initial rate hikes, ETH Bitcoin was going sideways, and it just kept testing the highs, tested the highs 3 times. Once the rate hike started to get higher and higher, ETH Bitcoin started to fall, and then we had higher for longer, just like we had in 2015. Remember in 2015 when we had higher for longer, ETH Bitcoin started to bleed. Higher for longer started in 2023 and went all the way till July of 2024. And during that time, ETH Bitcoin kind of bled. On the first rate cut, which happened in, it was around August, or I can't quite remember, but sometime in Q3 of last year, ETH Bitcoin started to bleed, similar to what happened in the first rate cut that happened in June of 2019. ETH Bitcoin bled all the way to a bottom. So I guess the question we have is, when's the next rate cut coming? And we know that historically, ETH Bitcoin, it preserved its bottom and actually bounced on the next, there was a rate cut freeze, right? And ETH Bitcoin found some stability temporarily, but just rolled back over on the next cut. So I'd like to take a look and keep in mind that during this entire time, right, that the federal funds rate has been like if you go back to 2019, right? Like the Fed funds rate was pretty much higher for longer. Bitcoin had a Bitcoin only bull market. That bull market lasted for approximately what, six months, maybe 6 7 months. You could argue maybe a little bit longer. Maybe it lasted for seven, for 8 months. But regardless, it was a Bitcoin only bull market. The rate cut or the rate hike freeze is similar to the rate hike freeze that happened from approximately July of 2023 to August of 2024. Bitcoin essentially had a Bitcoin only rally. Now, yeah, I mean, there were altcoins that were going up at the same time. We had Solana do pretty well. It printed a slightly higher all-time high. It didn't go to like $1,000 or anything crazy like people were projecting that it would. But see, all this was happening during a time of quantitative tightening. And so I think of this as kind of like the first leg of the bull market for Bitcoin, right? Similar to the 2019 first leg, not in the fractals, but see, Bitcoin, it only went on to put in initially a higher high of 73K, which was slightly higher than the 69K November high of 2021. And then it printed a 109K, slightly higher high recently in December. Not really that much higher in terms of inflation and M2 than out here, right? So what can we expect from the future? I mean, Bitcoin's in decline now, similar to how it was in decline in late 2019, heading into the 2020 recession. Now, we don't know if we're going to get a recession. Watch my last video. I'll attach it to the end of this one to see kind of my thoughts on that. But right now, at least, it doesn't look like we're heading into a recession. We could be, or this could be just another scare similar to 2016. So we've already had a cut. And the question is, like, where do we go from here? So let's go ahead and pull up some market data to sort of answer that question. Let me just make a disclaimer that we should never expect that things will play out the same way that they've played out in the past. But it is reasonable to hypothesize that if financial conditions are similar to a previous time period, that we could see some rhyming, right, with that previous time period. We are at a far elevated federal funds rate compared to where we were in late 2019. But if you look at the target rate probabilities for March 19th Fed meeting, which is coming up in just 6 days, it's been pretty consistently said that the Federal Reserve is likely to pause rates where they are. Last time this happened, ETHBTC found a bottom. It did. It found a bottom and preserved that bottom on the next trip down. If we look at the probabilities going forward, the projection is that we're going to have higher for longer, right? But at least in the May FOMC, the market is starting to become amenable to the idea of a 25 basis point rate cut. I mean, granted, the odds are still in favor of a freeze at 64.8%. But there's at least compared to a 3% probability of a 25 basis point rate cut, there's at least a higher probability in May. The market participants are baking in a rate cut by June. Now, June would mark the end of Q2 and get us closer to Q3. So there comes another rate cut. But is that the rate cut floor? It doesn't seem like it. So perhaps we could expect a bounce from Ethereum against Bitcoin to materialize on this first cut. Maybe it happens at the end of Q2, okay? Or we could see a bounce, or we could even see a bounce going into this meeting, right? We'll come back to that idea when we have the chart overlaid in a second. Then the market is very uncertain about July. Could see yet another rate cut, although they're more in favor of a freeze. And by the time we get to September, we pretty much even are talking about potentially a 50 basis point rate cut, 25 or 50. And then another rate cut in October. So it seems that the market is pricing in that we hit a floor this year, a federal funds rate floor by Q4 of this year, and that we won't have another rate cut until late in 2026, and that this could mark the floor. And typically, if we do get a floor in 2026, we saw this in 2020, late 2020 and 2021. This was a very bullish time for risk on assets. So this is pointing to, potentially the end of this year into next year, the entirety of next year, potentially being a risk on time for assets like crypto. Now, market participants are notoriously unreliable the further out you go. So we will have to revisit this data. We have to see what the Fed says on March 19th and then kind of go from there. But just keeping the market data in mind and going back to the ETH Bitcoin chart, thinking back to what happened in 2019, when that pause came, it was actually like, right, yeah, we had a rate cut. And then during the pause, we saw a little bit of activity from ETH Bitcoin, right? It wasn't impressive, but it was at least showing some signs of maybe bottoming. And then ETH Bitcoin definitively bottomed. It definitively bottomed right before the final cut. I imagine this process is going to take longer this time, but perhaps we are getting near a bottom for ETH Bitcoin, and it might have to test these bottoming levels for quite some time. And it probably, and it's hard to say if on this, this rate cut floor, or this rate cut freeze, if it happens, let's say in March, and we were frozen until like May. Remember, the Fed can also do emergency cuts, but let's just say that we're frozen until May. We might not see any significant strength out of ETH Bitcoin, right? But we could see maybe some choppiness. And then when we get another cut and another cut and another cut, I have to imagine at some point ETH Bitcoin price is in the final cut. Now, can it stay above this red zone is the big question. It's okay if ETH Bitcoin bleeds a little bit more. It is. It's fine. But if it starts to bleed into below the red zone, then we really have to worry. Then we're talking about coming back potentially to the 2016 lows. I don't think that's a likely situation. I actually do think that this red zone will hold and provide structure for a nice macro triple bottom for ETH Bitcoin. I'm being kind of optimistic with that, but if we look at the percentage drop needed to get to the bottom of the red zone, we're talking another 30% down on the ETH Bitcoin ratio. Bitcoin currently is $80,000. And honestly, I have a hard time seeing the worst I could see Bitcoin doing would be going down to 32K, like around there. And that would be in an actual recession. I don't know if we're going to get a recession. It's really hard to say. I don't think we are. If you look at my last video, you can see a lot of course, they're lagging. Market indicators don't seem to be heading in the direction of a recession. Some do, some don't. So anybody who tells you that they can call a recession at this point is full of it. But what this shows is that we are entering into that period that happened starting in June of 2019, right? Like here we have July of 2024, very similar to June of 2019. We're at a floor, very similar in some ways to November of 2019. We're at a floor in December of 2024. That floor might go all the way to May. And remember, during that time, ETH Bitcoin was able to show a little bit of relief. I don't know if it's going to do the same thing this time. I would like to think that it would. And then maybe on the next cut, ETH Bitcoin takes another dive and puts in a lower low. Okay, that could happen, or it could put in a higher low. We don't know. But my point is there is precedent from previous history to suggest that ETH Bitcoin can find some degree of stability in a rate cut cycle. Does it have to wait for the final floor to start its bull market? I don't think that it does. I could be proven wrong on that. I just think we need to see a sufficient enough inflow of liquidity into the crypto market to substantiate an ETH Bitcoin bull market or a risk on transition. So my theory about the bull market for Bitcoin and Ethereum is that I feel like the entire period from 2023 to 2025, where we are right now, strongly resembles the period from early 2019 to early 2020. It was like a 14-month period where we had a Bitcoin only bull run that took us to $14,000 by around Q3 of 2019, followed by a Bitcoin correction, and then another bounce, and then another correction. And that correction took us to a level almost. I mean, we tested the 2018 bear market lows. It was $3,800 Bitcoin. The 2018 lows were around 3,200. So talk about a drop. Like Bitcoin has hardly corrected at all compared to what it did in the 2020 drop. So as far as ETH Bitcoin is concerned, it seems to be following more or less what it did in 2019 and 2020, just on an extended timeline. We had a 9-month, 8 or 9 month Bitcoin bull market in 2019, Bitcoin only bull market. This time, we've potentially had a 2-year long Bitcoin only bull market. So I feel like the correction is going to take longer. But at the same time, if history rhymes with 2020, 2021, by the time we get either close to a rate cut floor, which could happen by the end of this year, or we get to a rate cut floor, we should see some strength from risk assets return. And we should also see ETH Bitcoin really start to establish a bottom sometime between now and the second half of this year. And that could happen in a double bottom, a triple bottom, a series of higher lows. We could potentially get a lower low. I think a lower low is likely, but can we maintain the 2019 lows? That's what we should need to be looking for, because if Ethereum can still prove itself to be an oscillator against Bitcoin after a bear market that has been going on for over 1,200 days, I want to point that out to you. Let's go back briefly to the chart, and here's my little encore. I'm going to turn off the federal funds rate, and I want to show you something. So if we take a measured move, right? Let's do date range. I did this. I think I did this in my last video, but like if you look at the last bear market for Ethereum Bitcoin, right? 812 days, 812-day bear market. If you look at the current bear market, I guess you have to decide, where did it begin? Technically, the all-time high was in December of 2021. So this bear market has been going on for about 1,200 days. That is that's like almost 25% more than the previous ETH Bitcoin bear market. The ETH Bitcoin bear market before the one that occurred in 2018, 2019, 2020, that bear market was only 301 days, less than a year. So what do you notice has been happening with the ETH Bitcoin bear markets? They've been increasing in length. What about the ETH Bitcoin bull markets? I mean, we could even look at this bear market too, if we wanted to, right? This first bear market lasted for 91 days. So what about the bull markets? What are they looking like? Well, if we go from here to here, again, I'm being approximate. Let's change the shading. So let's go ahead and throw this into the green. Okay. And let's do the same thing for this bull market right here. So we have a 126-day bull market followed by a 161-day bull market. And then what about this bull market? This bull market was 826 days, about the same length. Each of these bull markets is with this exception right here, roughly about the same length as the bear market, right? So let's suppose that we get a bull market that goes for, and I'm talking about an ETH Bitcoin bull market that extends for at least the length of its previous bear market. We don't know if that will happen, but let's just suppose that it did. Let's pretend that the ETH Bitcoin bear market ended today, and it went for another, let's just say 1,200, roughly 1,200 days. That would put the end of bull market. That would put the end of the ETH Bitcoin bull market in the middle of 2028. Now, granted, some of this could occur during a Bitcoin bear market, right? We know that Ethereum can outperform Bitcoin in the early stages of a bear market. But that would suggest that we could be in for a very long bull run. And if you consider all this one long cycle, right? Let's say that this crypto cycle ends in, let's just say late 2027, for instance. then this is arguably the longest Bitcoin bull market ever. And we had the longest Bitcoin only bull market that felt like an entire bull run. And now we'll have the second leg, which is the risk on bull market, which could last for a couple years. And we have kind of what now feels like a similar kind of scare to what we had in March of 2020 or early 2016, early to mid 2016. There were some scares during that time. We don't know if this is a scare or a recession. We don't have the data to really prove either case at the moment. We'll just have to keep revisiting it. But this should make you kind of open-minded to the idea that that Ethereum is not in fact dead, and it's just doing more or less what it's done before in the transition from risk off to risk on. And I just want to close out this video by showing you one more thing. I did this exercise with my Telegram group. By the way, if you want to join my Telegram, the link is in the video description. This is the inverted chart of ETH Bitcoin. Sometimes it helps to just look at something from a different perspective, right? Just to look at a different perspective on something, right? You take a drawing and you look at it a different way. You kind of invoke your right brain instead of your left brain, and maybe you'll see something that you didn't see before. And so what I did is I inverted or took the reciprocal of the ETH Bitcoin chart. Okay. And what seems to be happening here, although this is really a stretch, honestly, I'm just doing this for the first time. I don't really know how to draw this. Maybe this way. ETH Bitcoin's been going parabolic, like in a upside down way, which is not good, right? It's not good at all. This chart almost looks a little like Bitcoin dominance. And it makes sense, right? That ETH Bitcoin would be inversely correlated with Bitcoin dominance. In fact, we could even pull up the Bitcoin dominance chart just for fun, just for a comparison. Let's do that. Oops, I need to, let's see. Let's do it on a new price scale. Look at that. Look at how closely Bitcoin dominance, let me make it white, is tracking. I hate it when that happens. I need to select this. I'll just go in here. Let's go to settings. Let's make this white. It's just easier to see that way. ETH Bitcoin and Bitcoin dominance are pretty closely correlated these days. Look at this. I mean, it's virtually the same shape. And yes, you would expect that during Bitcoin periods of heavy Bitcoin dominance, like what happened in 2019, this is the 2019 Bitcoin only bull run. And then this is this is the 2023 to 2025 Bitcoin only bull run. So when we have a sharp drop in Bitcoin dominance, we should see a sharp rise in ETH Bitcoin ratio. And so now if I uninvert ETH Bitcoin, right, because it gets a little bit annoying, maybe looking at it inverted, you're basically seeing Bitcoin dominance. Look at that. It's ETH Bitcoin versus Bitcoin dominance. So as long as Bitcoin dominance is going up, ETH Bitcoin is going down. And we know Bitcoin dominance still has room to move up, which means ETH Bitcoin has room to move down. As long as ETH Bitcoin can preserve these lows, we're good. Okay. This is like the final destination. The low, let's just say the lows from 2019. So we'll see what happens, folks. I hope that this overview at least helps you to see that. I mean, and even what if ETH Bitcoin took out the lows? Like, we should, of course, consider that possibility. Okay, well, then ETH Bitcoin is a bleeder, or Ethereum is a bleeder against Bitcoin, and we just have to accept it. Then we'll come back and we'll do a new video and talk about what that might mean for the altcoin market. But there's a saying that everything bleeds against Bitcoin, but Ethereum is the number 2 crypto by total market cap. So we should really be careful about applying assumptions that ETH Bitcoin is now going to become a long-term bleeder. It may not. I'm open to it not happening. In fact, my base case is that it doesn't happen, but I don't know. So let's see what happens with Bitcoin dominance. Let's see what happens with ETH Bitcoin. And now that we are kind of approaching half 2 of the year, we should see quantitative easing start to take shape. And I think we'll see some more stability in the ETH Bitcoin ratio and a shift from macro bearish momentum to macro bullish momentum by the end of the year at the latest. That's what I think, as long as things go the way that they seem to be going. So thank you for joining me in another episode of Crypto Simulation Theory. Once again, I am the Gaussian Snake, and this is not financial advice. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and head over to my Telegram channel where I am in there all day long, every day, posting updates, thoughts, and discussions. Join the approximately 340 other members who are there with us. There's some very bright minds, respectful environment. You'll definitely like it there, and it's entirely free. So, see you there. All right, take care. Bye.